30 years as a police officer with Greater Manchester Police and North West Counter-Terrorism Unit. You had told me that you recognised a few of them, and you haven't. On retirement, he established his own project management consultancy company, working with the Home Office before returning to his first love, aviation, and joining the Avro Heritage Museum. He went into work with Northwest-based engineering company as a director, retiring again in November 2024 to focus his work on the museum. His talk will explain the origins of the Avro Heritage Museum, how it's developed since 2015, and the challenges for the future. Everybody, Ian Lomax.
First things first, ladies and gentlemen, can you all hear me okay? Yeah. That's always a good start. I'll put some specs on so I can actually see what I'm doing. Right, so I'm going to take you on a bit of a journey, explaining, as Darren said, where we are with the museum and how we got here. And also, I'll finish up by giving you some inclination as to our ideas going forward for the future. Because the important thing is, with the museum, we need to keep people interested in coming to visit us. So I'm going to take you on this journey, and we've got a number of key people who feature in our story over the years. But it's all got to start somewhere. So the Avro journey is based around 3 people. I'll explain those in a moment. But first, we must go over to the United States, because there's 2 people over there who inspired a generation of aviators and many others. It's these 2. Of course, it's the Wright brothers. Orville and Wilbur claimed to be making the first powered flight in December 1903. The question I pose is, did they? There's emerging evidence of a chap called Gustav Whitehead, who might have beat them to it by a couple of years. Not actually using a catapult launcher, but actually under their own propulsion. But that's a story for another day. But it's these 2 who actually inspired AV Row. So he's the founder of the company, and his story starts really with winning a model flying competition for the Daily Mail. In 1907, he won the grand sum of £75 for flying a model, the longest distance. With that, he started building full-size aircraft. And he started with this one up here, which is the Row 1 biplane. Crashed it a few times down at Brooklands. But started then with his 1909 triplane, and that became quite successful. As a result, in 1910, he established the company in the centre of Manchester, in the basement of a cotton mill. It's one of the first dedicated aircraft manufacturing companies. He was beaten by 2 months, I think it was November 1909 by the Wright brothers. But obviously Handley Page was there first, earlier in June 1909. So the company became AV Row and Company Limited in 1913, and they moved to a brand new factory in Miles Platting in Manchester. But the key thing is, we're in 1913. Significant events are coming. With war looming, we actually up production and take over a big factory in Newton Heath, in central Manchester. And it's there that AV, along with one of the next people I'm going to speak about, developed the design for probably one of the most famous World War I aircraft to come out of the Avro stable. That's the Avro 504. Now, the other 2 characters are the dynamic duo of Roy Chadwick and Sir Roy Dobson. Chadwick was recruited as a draftsman in 1911 and ultimately appointed chief designer, and it was Chadwick and Rowe who submitted that design for the 504 to meet the government's requirements for an aircraft, a multi-role aircraft, for the Royal Naval Air Service and the Royal Flying Corps. Eventually, the company built 12,500 of them. and it stayed in production until 1932. Now, Sir Roy, he was recruited as an apprentice. He had led quite an interesting life. But it was, I found out that he was actually, did a bit of test flying for the company. Everyone was having a go, really. But Roy really did rise to prominence, and during World War II took over as managing director and would eventually go into become managing director for the Hawker Siddeley Group. But we'll come back to that in a later slide. Now, this is where our story that I'm going to focus on tonight really starts. It's heritage. Now, what's heritage? We know now, but at the time, we just built aircraft. What do you mean heritage? So we kept records because we had to. But some members of the staff were actually quite interested in aircraft. And it took what was seen as an abnormal interest in aircraft. Just for information, that picture you can see there is the Challerton factory at Oldham in 1943, producing Lancasters, of course. Now, there was quite a massive upheaval between the wars. Avro, as we said, started in 1910. After World War I, of course, it was quite a dip for everyone. And the Crossley Motor Company were looking for extra production facilities in Manchester. And they bought a significant share of the Avro company. And they actually started producing cars, because the requirement for aircraft had really retreated. And then in 1928, it's quite significant this, Armstrong Siddeley took over the company, and this led to the departure of A.V. Rowe. He went on to other things. But, this is important bit, in 1924, Mr. Rowe bought the farmland at Woodford and set up the Woodford Aerodrome. This is where it gets quite poignant, because this was to replace the test flying facility they had in South Manchester, in Alexandra Park, which was wanted for housing. Now, if you come to Woodford today, you'll see we've also lost the aerodrome at Woodford, and we're surrounded by houses. So I just go back. 1935, the Hawker Siddeley Group subsumes a good part of the aviation industry in the UK. They take on Gloucester's, Avro, and but they make the significant decision to keep them trading in their own names. But Avro was part of Hawker Siddeley from 1935. So in World War II, we saw these two great aircraft. Talk about the Lancaster. As most of you know, that was evolved out of the ill-fated Manchester. But Roy Chadwick saw that the basic airframe was strong. The issue was with the engines, the Vultures. They weren't a good operational engine. Sadly, Roy Chadwick realised what we needed was Merlins. And he was able to procure 4 Merlins from his mate over at Rolls-Royce, down at Crewe. And they were installed on the Manchester 3, which is roughly what you see there. And it was so much different from the Manchester. It was a winner. Sam Brown, test pilot, flew it, and he was overjoyed when he landed. He said it's the best aircraft he's flown. Yeah, so manufacturing excellence. With the Lancaster, it was built in sections, as you saw in the previous one of the previous pictures of the Chancellor factory. It was such that you could take a Lancaster out of service, take bits apart and actually put a sort of new piece in. In manufacturing, all those parts came by road to Woodford in Manchester or to the other aerodromes like Yeadon, and they could be bolted together, ready for flight. Aircraft gets damaged, take the broken part out, put a new section of fuselage in. It was that easy, and that's all because of Sir Roy Dobson. He really finessed the manufacturing process. Now at Woodford, we produced over 4,300 Lancasters, and we had the production facility, as I mentioned, over at Yeadon. That was mainly focused on the Ansons and the Lancs. So 608 Lancasters over there, nearly 4,000 Ansons. And then we had Vickers Armstrong factory at Chester, where Airbus are now, Austin Motors plant at Castle Bromwich, and of course Victory Aircraft in Canada. So, the aviation enthusiasts. During the 1950s, interest in the aviation heritage starts to grow within the company. Members of staff start asking for permission to go and inspect the archives of what we've got and start taking notes for their personal use. One of them, are mentioned by name, was a chap some of you might have heard of called Harry Holmes. He's now fairly elderly, but Harry was passionate about the Lancaster. He, along with others, got permission to go and copy documents and such like, and started acquiring a collection. And this becomes important to the company, would you believe, when this happens. 1959, that's the Chanton factory. And this here is the drawing office and records office. Completely gutted by fire. So who did the company turn to? They can go to these enthusiasts. They actually rebuild a lot of the archives. And then we come to a bit of a sad episode. Hawke Siddeley decides to break into two groups, Hawke Siddeley Aviation and Hawke Siddeley Dynamics. And at this point, all semblance of the individual companies who now form that group, that includes de Havilland, Hawker, Avro, Gloucester, all their individual identities is confined to the skip. Things like letterheaded paper, models with the fictional G-A row. All those models confined to the bins. So again, our enthusiasts jump to the rescue. Now, Harry Holmes, he started as a security guard, but weaved his way up through the company, did a great job, and made himself quite a career. He ended up as in the public relations department. He took a bit of a gamble because he started squirreling some of this Avro memorabilia away in the store in the PR department. Fortunately, he was never caught. So we jump on now to 1977, and we see yet another reorganisation of British aerospace industries with the creation of British Aerospace. And there's a slight difference in approach to heritage. A chap called Charles Masefield, he joined Hawke Siddeley as a Woodford test pilot, production test pilot. He was appointed chief test pilot in '78, and just we ask you to remember, Mr. Harry Holmes comes into our story again. very shortly. But because Charles, he moves into general management of the entire Manchester and Chatterton and Woodford factories. He gets into a discussion with Harry, who by now is the head of public relations, and they actually agree we should do something about the proud history of Avro. So in 1981, young Harry is dispatched off to the Strathallan Museum in Scotland to bid for this beautiful aircraft, Kilo X-ray, that's up for sale. Believe it or not, Harry actually bought that for £600. Totally unairworthy. It was taken by truck back down to Woodford. It was originally designed, it would be an apprentice project. But for those of you who know, the Anson is not a modern aircraft. It's 1930s original design. This airframe was built in 1940s, and so most of the fuselage is covered in doped linen. I think the outer wings, centre wing section, all metal, but it's a different style of construction. Tubular frame. It ends up it's just seen as too much for the apprentices. So they recruit retired staff members who worked on them originally, and they restore the aircraft to flight. I'm pleased to say she's still flying to this day as part of the Shuttleworth collection. But at this time when we got her into the air, she joined the BAE Heritage flights, which included a Blackburn B2 and the de Havilland Mosquito, which sadly crashed at Barnes some years later. Now the next acquisition is this. This is XM603, and she arrived with us on the 12th of March 1982. That's her very last landing at Woodford. Charles Masefield, now the general manager, said he wanted something for the air shows, because Woodford had got a bit of a reputation for putting on good air shows. So what he thought, well, Vulcans have been retired out of RAF service, why don't we have one to taxi? So what does he do? We get one lined up. He's a test pilot. I'll go and bring it back. So he flies it in. Now Charles tells me that on the day, the RAF crew asked him what the weather was like, and he said, yeah, I'll just ring Woodford. He got a Met report from the airfield. It said it's quite a bad crosswind. It would have been too much for the RAF crew to fly it. Charles knew better. He did the landing perfectly. Now, shortly after its arrival, of course, certain activities happened in the South Atlantic, which resulted in the Victor fleet going into overdrive to service the Falklands. And so a decision was made to look at converting some Vulcans into K2 tankers. And 603 was used as a guinea pig to actually develop that. And then she was also used to test a new paint spray system. So she was the first victim, and she was put back into a original white livery. And of course, she now forms a centrepiece of the Avro Heritage Museum. But before that, in our story, we've got this. Now, some of you might have heard of this. Back in the day, going back to that conversation Harry had with Charles Masefield, he established a heritage centre with the help of Peter Summerfield, as now the Woodford General Manager. And they used some old personnel buildings up at, near the new assembly buildings. And it was agreed that they would use all the memorabilia they've got to actually tell the story. And so they put together a team of quite devoted retired employees and other volunteers, and they would work 2 days a week. Just to give you some idea of what it was like, This is the display gallery. And so I think you get the impression of all the bits of memorabilia now that are being collected. All these beautiful models here were actually developed by the company to show them, going to air shows and such like. And then there's all sorts of odd bits and pieces like RAF uniform, flying jackets that were worn by test pilots. And so it goes on. And then when they had a particular collection, a large collection, they actually were able to allocate them a room. So there was a 504 room. And then all these storyboards were created by the enthusiasts, documenting the development of the 504. This was all done in their own time. And then we had the Vulcan room. Some of these, as you can see, the blue steel models, they were used in support of the sale and development of the blue steel, and to show how it would be used. You can also see the skybolt. So that's the blue steel, that's the skybolt, which the Vulcan was designed to carry. But we had some quite interesting stuff here. It's one of the early wind tunnel models for the Vulcan, and the change of shape of the wing. Managed to squirrel away the design tables, all sorts of weird and wonderful things. And space was really tight. Everywhere you looked, there was memorabilia. Even the entrance, you walked in, you were hit by it straight away. That there is an original propeller from the Rogue One triplane that AV managed to crash. Now, this is where the popularity of this centre really takes off. Volunteers were being invited to speak outside the museum environment, to the local public, and were hosting visiting groups. Not so many schools at this time. But what was really interesting was that people buying aeroplanes were asking to come and see the Heritage Centre. The most fascinating fact I found out with this was the Lufthansa representatives from Germany, when they came over. They bought a fleet of RJ-85 Avro jets, but every time they came over to pick one up, please, can we go to the Heritage Centre? We want to see the Lancaster room. They were absolutely fascinated with the Lancaster. Now, do you remember that big white Vulcan we were talking about? Oh, it was camouflage when you probably last saw it. He'd painted in white, and a small group of volunteers kept it in running order up until about 2003. And these were all retired members of staff. But they kept this old girl going. She creaked a bit, but she ran. All the engines were running, but it became increasingly problematic for the company to have all retired members of staff working on the aircraft, going on the wings, making sure everything was okay, clambering up into the cockpit, working on the engines. And he said, it's never going to run at the air shows, so off you go, you're not coming back up. So the aircraft was left to sit out on the airfield. So that's from 2003 was the last engine run, and she just left to rot. Now, we acquired a second Vulcan, XM602. So this aircraft was retired from service in '82, along with most of the rest of the fleet. But she ended up as a ground training aide at St. Athan. But due to a deteriorating condition, she was outside and in a maritime environment, decision was made to scrap her. But the guys at the Heritage Centre clubbed together to buy the fuselage, the forward section, and they brought her back to Woodford. They had a cunning plan for her. Now, there's a reception committee. It was used to help Vulcan to the Sky get people fired up about the Vulcan. It went round to various air shows so they could raise money. But she was also used as a crew refamiliarisation, because some of these guys hadn't flown a Vulcan for quite a while. So they had to reacquaint themselves with all the procedures to operate this very complicated aircraft. Now, there's the Museum of Science and Industry in Manchester registered an interest in having this on permanent display. Great idea, but it depended on them getting funding to build an extension, which sadly never happened. So she stayed in the background, helping out with the Vulcan, return to flight of the Vulcan, but we looked after her. Now, this is an Avro Type F. For those of you not familiar with this aircraft, this was the world's very first enclosed cockpit aircraft. There's the cockpit. To protect the pilot from the weather. Believe you me, that is very tight to get into for someone of my size. Now this replica was built with the help of these volunteers from the Woodford Heritage Centre. And those members would eventually move over to the Heritage Museum with us. And the aircraft itself would come back to us because Mozzie, this was the actual foyer of the Museum of Science and Industry. He decided they wanted that space for something else. So they said, do you want it? And we said, yes please. Next we come to the Row 1 triplane. This aircraft was directly commissioned to be built by Eric Burden Rose, a grandson of A.V. Rowe. And he enlisted help of the volunteers at the museum. And this was intended to fly. It actually went for flight testing at Wood Vale. And unfortunately, they could never get it to fly in the air. There were some changes had been made to the design to satisfy the Civil Aviation Authority that it was safe to operate. But the guys who put it together overlooked one very important thing, and that was a high tension lead onto the spark plugs from the magneto. They put a modern one on rather than what AV would have used at the time to connect to the Jap engine. And when we took it to a specialist down at that Vista, he looked at it and said, well, no wonder you couldn't get the full power on it. This lead you were using, I think was from Bosch. It's got inbuilt resistors. You would never develop the level of spark required for that engine to deliver its maximum power. So we now know why it never got off the ground. I'm glad to say now that's a part of our collection. We've got it fully assembled at Woodford. It sits in a hangar alongside the Shackleton, which I'll talk about later. And the engine runs, so it's ground taxiable. I don't fancy it personally, but it will taxi. Right, back to our story now. MRA4. The scrapping of the MRA4 aircraft led to the closure of the Woodford site in 2010, or 2011 I should say. Defence Spending Review of 2010 was actually dealt a killer blow to that aircraft, along with other parts of the British history, historic aircraft like the Harrier Force, all went down the same road. The Nimrod fleets were taken out of service. MRA4 was cancelled. and with that Woodford closed. But I'm pleased to say that British BAE Systems, as it was now, actually understood how valuable that heritage asset that we've been speaking about was. And they decided they were going to do something about it. And they agreed with the volunteers that it would continue in life, but in a new place. And so they wanted the Heritage Centre that would have public access. So this was the first idea. This is at the southwest end of the airfield, and this was the old Avro Clubhouse. Now, one of the most, those of you familiar with the airfield may know a bit of a story about this. A very wealthy American billionaire called Howard Hughes used to stay here quite often. He actually bought a Hawker Siddeley 748 for his airline, but decided to keep it as his private aircraft and hang it at Woodford. For what reason, I have no idea. But Howard used to fly in, be taken to there, and then he would go out flying with the Avro test pilots. And if you read some of, I forgot his name, name's gone. One of our test pilots recalls a very iffy landing, I think it was at East Midlands Airport, with Howard at the controls and 748, having taken off from Woodford. Now, back to our involvement with this building. The Heritage Centre people thought, great, we've got somewhere, it's accessible to the public, but it's no better than what we've got now. We need something more. We've got so much to show the public. And so, main runway, second runway, that was the assembly buildings at the top, and this was the flight sheds area here. That's the Avro Clubhouse, and then up here is the airfield fire station. Members of the Heritage Centre said, we want number 2. BAE said, no, this is your new base. Fortunately, it didn't quite work out. And so there was a bit of a protracted period, but our guys had the cunning plan. And BAE, in fairness, they saw the benefits in converting the fire station. It's a simple portal frame structure, very easy to convert, whereas the clubhouse would have been an absolute nightmare. So to give you some ideas, 602 actually stored inside the old fire station. And so we set up the new beginning. And so this fire station conversion was going to be funded by BAE in its entirety. £2.5 million. They also established a charity, the Avro Heritage Trust, to run the museum. And eventually, the museum opened in 2015. Its patron is Sir Charles Masefield, continues his association with us. So here's what we designed. So we have the space for the Vulcan, you can see it over here in the background. Main exhibit hall with a Vulcan in the front there. Reception, conference room, archive facilities, cafe, members crew room, office accommodation, exhibit storage, and that secure area for 603 out the back. This is really what you see today. So, some pictures here, briefly take you through the conversion. So in May 2015, she looked something like that. Started to take shape. Then in November 2015, this is how we opened. Quite spectacular. These murals you can see here are actually in the staff canteens at Chatterton and Woodford. All the rest of the exhibits are stuff collected and squirreled away in garages, in bedrooms, by all the members. So a good starting point. But 603 outside was looking rather sorry. The ravages of many years out on the airfield of both the weather and vandals are taking its toll. In a pretty sorry state. Now, this is where I come into the story in 2015. We start being off looking for other acquisitions. So the first one to arrive is this lady, an English Electric Canberra. So the first question you've got to ask is, what on earth is the interest for Woodford and Avro in an English Electric Canberra? We built 75 under licence during the Korean crisis. And this was one of ours. There she is now on display. So we've changed the layout already. And I gave you a hint before. This is acquisition number 2. This is XP235, the Nimrod, built at Woodford. But we just got the forward section. We actually purchased her from Hawker Homtech Aviation at Scampton. They purchased her for some reason for some crew training that they thought they could get a contract for, which never came to fruition. So they sold it on. We were fortunately in a position to have the cash to buy it. And now we've got quite a lot of the electrics working, so she's open to the public. It's a popular tour. Next acquisition. Vickers VC10. XV106. Now an aircraft very dear to Darren, who used to work on them. Again, what on earth is a VC10 built at Weybridge going to Woodford for? You may know that in the early 2000s, British Aerospace had to consolidate their estate. They had many airfields, many manufacturing facilities around the country. And the decision was made to close the Weybridge factory. Now, some of you, I would hope, most of you will know that for large aircraft to remain in service, they have to have something which we call a design authority. That's someone who's familiar with the aircraft design, can evaluate any changes, modifications, or repairs that are needed to be made to the aircraft whilst it's in service. The design authority for the VC-10s and other large aircraft was all consolidated at Woodford. So a couple of our members now were the design authorities for the VC-10 fleet. And one of our members was actually the decommissioning project manager for the VC-10s when they went out of service. And it was him that was able to acquire the cockpits for the XV106. Now she's sat in a cradle outside the back of the museum, and she's open to the public. We've got the cockpit lights up. Very, very popular with the kids. They love it because they can touch everything. Now, here's a question. How do you restore that mess? Well, it is simple. You've got to do a lot of rubbing down, take all the old paint off, reveal the old camouflage underneath, repair all the broken bits, so that was the hard job. And then we repaint, and that was an even harder job. As you can see, we've got the aircraft in a big tent, a scaffolding tent. That was invaluable. Something this large to be repainted, we needed to be able to work on it every day. Here she is now, resplendent in her factory livery. This is how she left Woodford in 1963. Now, what you can't see there is what we did as part of phase 2. Because we had to fully strip down the cockpit. There had been a lot of water ingress over the years. It was quite appalling how bad it was. We had to restore the actual crew doors to get that working again. We repaired all the damaged control columns that had been savaged by vandals with hacksaws. We've restored all the cockpit insulation, we've rewired all the instrument panels so they all light up and work, so it works as though it was an in-service aircraft. Externally, we've got all the external lights going. And, I can't show you a video of this because it is actually good. We've actually made the doors, the bomb bay doors, operational again. In the empty engine bays, we've got only 2 engines on the aircraft because 2 have gone to Wellesbourne Mountford. We've actually now got the hydraulic motor fitted in one of those engine bays, and it actually drives the bomb bay doors. And then, the final piece in the jigsaw is we put a very large set of speakers in the back tailpipes. And we can actually recreate the engine start by recording the guys down at Wellesbourne who were very helpful to us, and we play that and it goes down the storm. Not with the neighbours unfortunately, but we like it. Very popular with photo shoots. As you can see, this is nighttime shoots. It's the only white Vulcan in the country, or in the world I think, so it goes down the storm. So far, that's what we've got. Then more comes. This is the Avro Shackleton AW2 WR960. First flew from Woodford in 1954. We brought her home in January 22. She was originally on display for many years at the Museum of Science and Industry in Manchester. Sadly, the museum building was suffering and the aircraft had to be removed. And we've now got this in storage, broken down as you can see, just like it was built and transported to Woodford from Chatterton. And eventually, we're going to have this fully rebuilt and on display in a new building, which I'll come to later. This is a replica of a Lancaster, famous one, down at Hendon, S for Sugar, Romeo 5868. If you came to the Cosford Air Show in 2018, we brought this on a low loader for people to see and go on board. This now sits in the museum and is on show every day. We do cockpit tours and it's very, very popular at the museum. And then to accompany it, we recently acquired this Ramsam bomb from the RAF Museum. Out of their stored collection, and that really does catch people's attention because that's out in the car park and you can see it. We have it on display in the summer months and then we put it away for the winter to keep the weather off it. We also acquired this from the RAF Museum. This is the Avro 707C, the only one in the world. There's 5 707s built, primarily to test the delta wing for the ministry when Avro first proposed the use of a delta wing on the bomber we now know as the Vulcan. This is a 2-seater. This 2-seater aircraft is quite unique because the Royal Aircraft Establishment used it in the development of fly-by-wire. The aircraft was rigged so that on the left-hand seat you have conventional flying controls with the cable runs inside, whereas the right-hand seat had a joystick that operated electric flying controls. No computers at this point in time, but a unique aircraft and was flying up into the 1960s. So gratefully received from the RAF Museum. She's been repainted and she looks really good. The German Shepherd's ears you can see there. That was is owned by one of the lads who was involved in the repainting. We also acquired one of our own, this Avro 748. Came to us in quite bad order, but we restored her and she's on display now. And as you can see, along with the Lancaster, she sits with an Avro Anson. That Anson there, AGPG, was actually the company demonstrator of the Mark 19 Anson. So it worked out of Woodford from 46 up into the 1950s when it got sold off. to sky views, and it ended up with Echo Electronics. And it was used as a testbed for Concorde's weather radar, the E320. So it's got quite a bit of history, that airframe. So as you can see, we've got a growing collection. More recent arrival, as some of you will have heard, is the Avro TX214. Came from, that's her departure from Crossford, and now she's reassembled, partially reassembled, undergoing quite a lot of work at the moment. Slightly altered the position now, but she's back on her wheels the same day as she arrived. So a bit of work still to do on her. And that's the story so far. But what does the future hold? So we've had some pretty eventful times, but we've learned to expect the unexpected. So for the future, STEM education is a big thing for us. Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. We've got lots of school visits going on now, which is really good, because we're getting kids from TOTS, primary age, all the way through to sixth formers coming. We get regular groups coming from local schools, wanting to understand what career prospects they've got in the STEM, particularly in aero engineering. We're providing work experience for school kids as well as college students. I've had degree students, aero engineering students, and we even had a lad doing his masters on aeronautical engineering who spent a summer with us just learning about the old airframes and how they were put together and picking the brains of our people. Going on to that, we've established quite strong links with both Salford University and Manchester University, and that's really working well. And then of course in industry, we've got strong links with BAE Systems and their BAE Systems Heritage, but we also have good links with a lot of the former suppliers who work with the company, people like HMG Paints. They provided the paint free of charge to repaint the Vulcan. Really are very supportive. And we've also established links with companies in the Manchester area who have a link with aviation, but not through Avro. Fairies were another big aircraft manufacturer in Manchester. Their successor is a company called KMDS, and they still work for the Ministry of Defence now. Very supportive, and we're working with them on recreating some of the Fairies heritage so they can display it. Now, expansion. You've seen what we've got in storage, we want to get it on display. So this is our proposal to expand the museum. Now, just to give you some idea, this is the old fire station building here. And this is our extension. About 90 metres long by 30 metres wide. So we'll be able to get the Shackleton in. We could potentially get a 146 in, or Avro RJ, the Nimrod and the 707. But there won't be room for the RJ now. We've got too much other stuff. So it's an extra 2,700 square metres of exhibition space. Give you some idea what it's going to look like. The structure, the facing, is similar. If you've been down to the Eden project in Cornwall, you'll see like a clear membrane that they use. We can get this coated with to cut out the UV, which is absolutely critical to the long-term preservation of the aircraft. Equally, we'll have an array of solar panels on the roof. But the main structure, we've opted for quite an expensive solution, which will be glue laminated timber with wire stresses to to hold it together, because we recognise that as a throwback to the old Avro aircraft. That's how they would go, with glue laminated timber and wires. So we think that's a really strong selling point for it. So if you know anyone with £10 million going burning a hole in the pocket, please come and speak to me. And so, what next? $1 million question. So we've always been looking to expand the collection, but as you can see, we've come up against space limitations now. I took delivery of a Road 1 biplane replica yesterday. I have got no room for anything else. We just are full. But our challenge is to keep the museum relevant. We've got to find ways of giving that interaction for people. One of the areas we know we're weak at the moment is interactive exhibits for children. We've got to do a lot more on that. And we've got a really strong story to tell about the Northwest. There's a tremendous engineering heritage up in the north, and we've got a great story to tell and hopefully inspire the next generation of engineers, pilots, and people who want to work with aviation. But lastly, I'll leave you with this thought. One of our biggest challenges will be finding people to come and replace those of our members who we lose through natural events. That's our big challenge. And it's a big challenge for all volunteer-led museums. Because we don't have any paid staff, we're all volunteers. So, any questions?
Not too many years ago, I went up to the museum and had a great experience in the Lancaster simulator. Is that still available?
Yes, it is. We have, let me get some water. We've got the Lancaster cockpit you saw. But very generously, the BBC gave us a virtual reality system, which I think the RAF Museum also run, which is the Radon Berlin. It's about a 15-minute journey, sat in the Lancaster, watching from various positions in the Lancaster. And the audio you're hearing is Winford Vaughan Thomas, a wartime correspondent, who gives an absolutely superb description of this mission, which he and his sound engineer, Reg Pilsley, went on during 1943 over Berlin. It's quite sobering, and I've had a lot of people breaking down in tears. Reason being, their grandfathers actually flew those missions, and they had no understanding of what they went through. So quite sobering for them, but it's also quite informative to show you the horrors of what they were going through night after night after night. And so it's a very powerful exhibit, but the BBC very generously gave it to us free of charge. And all we had to provide was the virtual reality headset and the IT equipment. But very popular, and that's still available.
My dad was a flight engineer, did 33 trips.
Yeah.
And it was fascinating and very, very realistic to go in that. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing people don't appreciate. You see virtual reality, you're thinking, how easy is this? Well, when you get it, you put it on, you think, oh yeah, this is all very good. And then suddenly you're hooked and you're in space. You're travelling with them. Because you've got all the audio taken from the time by young Reg, who was using acetates on a turntable to record all the audio from this mission, not knowing whether they'd actually ever get back. That's the real sobering part about it. Well, it's left a tremendous legacy, which the BBC sat down with, using the excerpts from that recording, and created this wonderful VR. So if any of you want to come up and see it, have a go, please, you'll love it. Sorry, the question about?
With your expansion, why was the decision to leave the Vulcan outside and not the villa?
We don't own it, believe it or not. It's owned by the landlords. The actual Vulcan is currently owned by Red Robe or Barrett's, as they are now. So it's owned by a housing company. Yes, you've just bought this site and you've acquired a nuclear bomber. Yeah, so we look after it for them. But no, when they did the design for the entire estate, one of the things was they saw the Vulcan as being quite iconic, and they wanted it pride of place so everyone could see it. And so they did the design of the estate, the way it's laid out, and there'll be some playing fields eventually where they're called the Vulcan playing fields, and they will have sight of the Vulcan. So our challenge is we would dearly like to get it, we really want it undercover, because it's costing us arm and a leg at the moment to keep on top of the maintenance. Because as you can imagine, living on a building site, we're getting all the dust being blown onto the aircraft, and I can tell you that when that dust, those sand grains land on the skin, the wind rolls them round and it's like sandpaper, and it takes the strips of paint off. So it's just like the Forth Road Bridge, we've got to stay on top of the painting, and we'll have to do a full repaint very shortly. But we need the building work to stop first. We can't afford for it to get ruined.
I'm Ian from the Vulcan Flight Simulation School.
Right.
And one thing that we found is there's a group of people, the Avro Football Club.
Oh yes, yeah.
And they're really keen on the heritage. And I just wondered, with you all needing to bring new fresh blood in, whether you could do some kind of tie-in with them.
We're already speaking to them, yeah. Because they're up in Oldham, and yeah, we are in touch with them quite often. So yeah, in terms of blood, new blood, we're doing quite well with membership. We are growing, and we are still attracting new people in. The people we've got to, some of the youngsters we have come through, I've taken, let me see, I've got 2 youngsters starting with us as 15-year-olds, are now licensed engineers, one's with Jet2 and one's with Ryanair in Manchester. And we're trying to bring more of those youngsters in, get them enthused, and then we give them to the industry, and then hopefully they'll come back to us. And indeed, certainly one of them, the lad who's working for Ryanair, on his days off he's with us, which is really good. But we've got to get more of these people. But would you believe our hardest job is telling the local community we're there? We've put adverts out, we've done social media. Social media is working quite well for us at the moment because our visitor numbers are going up. But I'm still getting people coming into me and saying, I only live a mile or so away. I didn't even know you were here. Because we're now not on Woodford Aerodrome, well we are, on the site of Woodford Aerodrome, but we're in the middle of a housing estate. And we've got signs leading people to the museum, and getting brown signs out on the public roads has been a real pain. We're nearly there now, but it's taken a number of years to get the progress. And it's getting our message out there to people, we're here, come and have a look, you might like it. Over here, sir.
How legal is your tenure of your site?
Right. Oh, good one. At the moment, we have a rolling lease, which, as you can imagine, if I'm going to try and go to a sponsor and ask for 10-15 million pound, how long? No. What we've agreed is when we get the planning permission for the extension, we will change to a 99-year lease. So that will give us the wherewithal to go to potential sponsors and say, we've got a good tenure on this site. Please give us the money.
You don't want to run to the thought, do you?
No. We're very fortunate. We pay a peppercorn rent, and that was established by BAE as part of the deal. So we're in a far better position than the chaps at Brunton Court were. Any more questions?
It makes me sound a complete Luddite, and this is the wrong audience for a Luddite, which I'm not. You mentioned about interactive stuff for younger visitors. I love interactive stuff when it works, but
Yes.
we've been to 2 different two of the most prestigious science museums in the country. I mean, one was the National Space Centre, and they had an entire gallery where the interactive stuff was down. We couldn't find any stuff. Eventually we went to the gift shop and they tried to phone. There was no paper labelling. There was so an entire gallery. We just looked at things and had no idea what we were looking at. There were things like there was a cheque signed by Buzz Aldrin. Why?
Yeah.
And we'll never know because
Yeah.
it's not worth us detouring to go back for that one gallery.
Well,
So they've lost
Right.
custom.
One of the things we learned quite early on was we've got so much data and information that we can't even show. So how could we do it? So someone had the right idea, well, if we put that on a file server on the internet, and then we put a QR code on the exhibit, they can go with a mobile phone, they click on it, and it will take them to this wealth of information. So that's one way. But you're right, in terms of
Just have basic labelling.
yeah. So our labelling, we try to put as much information as we can. But going back to the interactivity, what I'm really concerned about is for youngsters that they want to touch and feel things, and that gives them experiential learning. And some of our artefacts are so delicate. We've got to find other ways of doing that. We have a flight simulator. Now, we haven't got acres of space at the moment, but we're talking now about how can we increase our flight simulator, because quite often on a weekend we'll have a queue of people waiting for this one flight simulator. And it's great because the kids and the big kids love it as well. But having the space that's needed to do that, because what we dearly like to do, and we've been talking about it, is you want to fly a Lancaster. You go to the Lancaster, there's a little simulator there, you can have a go and see what it was like. You want to fly 748, there's a little simulator there. And that's what we're looking at now, how we can do within the space limitations we've got. Obviously, when we move on into a bigger space, we might be able to start bringing up full-size cockpits.
Sounds brilliant.
Thank you.
Sorry, there's another, can I just take one more
Yes,
question?
Can you, if you go on a normal day, can you visit the 707?
Right, okay, thank you, it's a very good point. What we do at the moment is, when we have large events, we will open up as much of the museum as we can. We are constrained by the amount of volunteers we have. So the storage space where we've got the Shackleton, the Avro 707, the Anson, we will open it if we've got people to man those positions so we can keep people safe, so they can look at them. So on normal days, when we're open Friday, Saturday, Sunday, we wouldn't normally have them open. But in July, I think it's the second weekend of July, we've got a large event over 2 days, the Wings and Wheels event, and we will have those hangar facilities open for people to see.
If you get the planning permission, could you get lottery funding if you've got that lease?
Right, okay, lottery funding is very, very interesting. We inquired about lottery funding to actually put the building up. Lottery said, no way. Okay, what can we get? So the interactivity exhibits and the educational stuff we'll get support for. But the building, not counting else chance. They won't touch new buildings. Even though it's an extension, technically, it's essentially a new build. They won't play.
Thank you, Ian. Well, what an interesting and insightful talk. I was particularly impressed by the exhibits you've got. I've not been to the museum, although obviously I'm going to have to correct that. The row 1 triplane, beautiful aeroplane, it's absolutely stunning. The incredible Vulcan, which looks amazing in white, and I'm sure when the repaint goes ahead, I'm sure it will be returned to its former glory. But a lovely looking aeroplane. and I hadn't seen the Avro 707, well obviously I've seen the Avro 707, I didn't know about the fly-by-wire version,
Yeah.
which is interesting. Yeah, very interesting to see that. I was pleased to see that.
Well, so Charles Masefield, who was obviously a test pilot, he knew of it, I'd never seen it. And it was like a kid in a sweet shop when we showed it him. He was into the cockpit, wow, 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 wow. He was absolutely just beside himself.
And when was that built?
That was built, I think, about 53.
53.
Yeah, it's quite an old girl, but she was well looked after, and all we've had to do is give her a fresh lick of paint on the outside. She looks beautiful, really does.
I was also impressed by your STEM involvement. For a museum, a lot of museums get STEM involvement, obviously, but the kind of work experience, not with schools, with colleges, even with universities, I think that's.
Well, one of the things we've had recently is we've had a lot of youngsters looking for opportunities on the Duke of Edinburgh scheme for volunteering. So we said, hey, come and join us. And so we've had now a procession of youngsters coming through who actually enjoy it and say, we'll join. And so we've got them coming on as young members. And I think it's really good for our new visitors coming in, never seen this, bring their families in, and then suddenly, oh yeah, there's a youngster out working on the reception alongside an adult. Oh yeah, welcome, and they're as knowledgeable as the adults. And they really are. For example, I've got a 15-year-old who does his GCEs next year. He's learning to fly. And yeah, I'm guaranteed he will either be RAF or in the airlines. Without a shadow of doubt, he's on his mocks. They're all A-star plus. I'm thinking, this boy's going places. Well, that's the talent we've got to nurture and move on. Because that's our future.
And good luck with the extension. I think that it's inspired that idea of using glue laminated timber and wire tension wires to reflect the history.
With my civil engineering background, I've seen a variety of forms of construction, and certainly glue lamps. I'd seen these going up and thought they're really attractive. And then we look at the triplane. I was looking at it thinking, why not? And that's the inspiration.
So, thank you, Ian.
Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I think you'll agree, a wonderful talk, and I invite you to show your appreciation in the usual way.
Just before everybody goes, just like to say, obviously, I mentioned earlier, this is the last talk of this season. So to all the members, our regulars, thank you very much for your support throughout the last 10 lectures. And tonight we've got quite a few new faces in here, so welcome. And we'd love to see you again in September. We are starting again on the Thursday, if I can just turn around, 18th of September. Most Secret, the story of Duffield Airfield.